I'm sure most of you are familiar with Ursus, or the Arknights version of Russia, or the country with the bears. Since we've been dealing with it for the past 1.5 years, let's take a closer look at all the things that made Ursus into what it is today. I'll be covering things that happened 1,000 years ago all the way up to the start of the main story, and though I'll try to avoid everything plot related, some things will need to be said to give you the whole picture. With that out of the way, let's jump in. Nearly 1,000 years ago, the Hypergryphs ruled what is Ursus today. However, they were overthrown by the Ursus people, and Ursus became the dominant race of Ursus. Its militaristic beginnings is likely a factor in its later advances towards neighboring nations, and border conflicts with Sami persist to this day. Through conflict, fighting, and expansion, Ursus chugged along until a few hundred years ago, when a certain emperor took the throne. He was, as the people of Ursus would have considered him, an excellent emperor, and he was said to have embodied the spirit of Ursus. He had a vision of a glorious future, and he took steps towards this vision. With swords and cannons, he banded the people together, placed his goal above the concept of race or birth, and propelled the nation into prosperity. Many conflicts occurred during this era. Just from Helager's files alone, there was the Battle of the Four Emperors, the 10th Urcha War, and the Blood Peak campaign. This was also when Patria left Kazdel and began fighting for Ursus. Then, the emperor passed away. The circumstances of his death is a mystery, and it may not have been a natural one. Regardless, the current emperor of Ursus took the throne. This emperor has ideologies that are completely different from his predecessor. At the time, the political scene was mostly in the hands of the old nobles from the former emperor's rule, backed by their military, their long lineages, and their merits in battle. The new emperor, along with the royalists composed of the newer nobles who rose to power through capitalism, sought to retake control from these old nobles. This led to the Great Rebellion. A large number of old nobles were killed, some were exiled, while others defected to the new emperor. The Ursus people, on the other hand, were left to their own devices while the upper class were busy fighting among themselves. Chaos began to break out in the towns and villages that no longer had a noble governing them. Without an external conflict like a war to direct their attention to, they went for the easiest target instead, the infected. All of a sudden, the lukewarm attitude towards the infected turned cold. They were hunted down by the patrols and were either killed or thrown into the mines on the tundra. There were some resistance and protests, but these were suppressed by the military. The Great Rebellion allowed the current emperor to regain control of the nation, but it came at the price of a severely weakened Ursus. Decades of warfare and the subsequent internal strife has left the nation exhausted, and many people still fondly reminisce about the glorious days of the past under the former emperor's rule. This takes us to the present, 20 years prior to the events of the main story. Two things happened this year. One is the Ursus-Lumen conflict, where Wei regained control of Lumen from an Ursus noble. The other is the discovery of the sarcophagus by another Ursus noble, an ancient device with an unknown purpose. The scientists working on the sarcophagus realized the potential this device held, and with the interjection of the military, they fear that Ursus will use it for war. They sealed the sarcophagus off to prevent it from being used, which led to the death of many of the scientists. But thanks to their efforts, now the sarcophagus can only be used as an energy source to power the city of Chernobog. Nevertheless, the sarcophagus allowed Chernobog to break free from the military-controlled Originium production, which in the past was the city's main energy source. The rise of Chernobog brought up many new noble families, but this also made the city a target for the remnants of the old nobles. Although the emperor purged many of them, the Ursus border is still controlled by these nobles and their armies. The old nobles realize that the current Ursus is weak. They want to bring back the old days when Ursus was rich and powerful, and when they were the ones in charge. The best way to go about that, they decided, was to start a war. Chernobog happened to be the closest city to the border, and Chernobog happened to be the closest city to Lumen. The rest, as they say, is history. This is where the main storyline takes over, but just to conclude, the war the old nobles were planning on failed to start, the nobles themselves committed suicide, and the Ursus Emperor is determined to rid of their influence. Knowing the history of something often makes it more interesting, and I believe the same goes for stories. So, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video.